morning and thank you for joining us. You are watching our mid-morning edition of Arirang News on this Monday, April 13th, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Shin Se-min. And before we begin, these are the stories we're following at this hour. Starting today, all arrivals from the U.S. will have to get tested for COVID-19 within 3 days of self-isolation as Seoul battles with the steady inflow of imported cases. A top U.S. infectious disease expert admits earlier COVID-19 mitigation efforts would have saved more American lives and expressed cautious optimism that with the slowing coronavirus, the U.S. economy might be able to reopen in May. Plus, North Korea will be pouring almost 50% of its annual budget into economic development as a way of pursuing self-rehabilitation. The regime also expanded its budget for health services by over 7%. Our starting point this morning with South Korea continuing to see a low number of new COVID-19 infections. It has reached another milestone as the nation's recovery rate topped 70%. On Sunday, 125 more patients were discharged from hospital after making full recoveries, raising the total number to 7,368. And that recovery rate now stands at 70.1%. A total of 2,930 patients are still currently being treated. And despite reaching that milestone, health authorities remain cautious as the fatality rate continues to slowly rise, now at slightly over 2%. Starting today, all arrivals to South Korea from the United States will have to be tested for COVID-19 within 3 days of self-isolation. And the new measures come as there has been a steady rise in the number of imported cases from the U.S. Our Kan Hyung-woo tells us more.
South Korea is ramping up its COVID-19 preventive measures to reduce the number of imported cases from the United States. Starting Monday, all arrivals from the U.S. must get tested within 3 days of self-isolation.
Previously, only those showing symptoms were tested, but we plan to test every arrival from the U.S. within 3 days of self-isolation.
The new measures come as there has been a steady rise in the number of imported COVID-19 cases from the U.S.
50% of imported patients, 228 out of the 459, were from the U.S. over the past 2 weeks, and it's posing a higher risk. So we are shifting to a test everyone policy like we have on European arrivals.
The South Korean government's suspension of visa-free entry and visa waiver programs for 90 countries that have imposed entry bans on South Koreans also takes effect Monday. The country has seen fewer domestic cases in the past week, with the number of new cases staying around 30 for the second straight day on Sunday. Since March 27th, health authorities have required all entrants from the U.S. to follow a 2-week self-quarantine, regardless of whether they display symptoms or not. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
The latest global tally of confirmed COVID-19 patients currently stands over 1.83 million, with the death toll at over 113,000. The U.S. is the hardest hit with nearly 550,000 confirmed cases and more than 20,000 deaths. And the U.S. has the highest reported number of deaths in the world. And a somber day in the UK, as Britain's health secretary put it, after the country on Sunday surpassed 10,000 COVID-19 deaths. Over in Japan, the number of confirmed cases topped 8,100 as of Sunday, with the death toll at 149. Russian health authorities also confirmed over 2,000 new cases on Sunday alone, bringing the total number of infections there to over 15,000. As the United States is seeing signs that the COVID-19 outbreak could be peaking, a number of senior health officials are raising the possibility of reopening its economy next month. But when asked whether President Donald Trump's May 1st target could be met, they urged caution about rushing. Our Kim Hyo-sun tells us more.
Senior U.S. public health officials say the country could start to gradually reopen in May amid signs the COVID-19 pandemic has reached its peak. Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, told CNN Sunday that parts of the country could begin easing restrictions next month, but he urged caution. He added that different states would be ready at different times rather than the U.S. turning on a, quote, light switch. However, the head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration said Sunday that is hopeful about Trump administration's target of May 1st as a date for reopening the country.
We're looking at May 1st. Obviously, we want that to happen as soon as possible. I can't predict at this point because, as I said, things are happening very rapidly. But this team of doctors, this team of experts, all of government approach, they're focused at looking at the earliest possible time that we can get Americans back to work safely and to give Americans the confidence they need to make sure that these are the right decisions.
That said, he was cautious, adding it was still too early to say for sure whether the target could be met. Meanwhile, President Trump reportedly ruled the option in March of allowing COVID-19 to wash over the U.S. as one potential strategy for dealing with the outbreak. According to the Washington Post, he suggested allowing the country to develop so-called herd immunity. Dr. Fauci, however, warned that many people would die. President Trump accepted Fauci's warning, but he's still highly focused on an early reopening of the country's economy. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
OPEC and several other major oil producers have finalized a historic agreement to cut production by 9.7 million barrels per day, the single largest output slash in history. And Sunday's emergency meeting of OPEC Plus, the second such kind in less than a week, came as oil-producing nations scrambled to strike a deal as a way to prop up falling oil prices as COVID-19 continues to hammer demand. Under the new deal, Mexico will be cutting production by 100,000 barrels per day rather than the 400,000 it had been previously asked to cut. The 9.7 million barrels per day cut will begin on May 1st and will extend through the end of June. Studies have found that COVID-19 can replicate 3.2 times faster than SARS, which caused a global health crisis back in 2003. According to the South China Morning Post, despite its fast replication process, the virus causes slower responses in our bodies. And this leads to a more asymptomatic spread and makes it difficult to contain the pandemic. And scientists also claim to have found 3 variations of the virus so far. Researchers claim this proves COVID-19 will be around for some time to come. An end to South Korea's COVID-19 social distancing policy is inching ever closer as a number of new confirmed cases has dropped off sharply in recent days. But that's not to say that fight is over. We have a preview of the South Korean government's plans for a new set of guidelines to ease us all toward a degree of normalcy. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
With the number of new coronavirus cases remaining below 50 cases a day in South Korea, the government is considering modifying its COVID-19 prevention guidelines. Here are the 5 key rules the government are labeling routine safety measures. Staying home when sick. In the case of high fever or persistent coughing, people are recommended to call in sick and stay inside. The guidelines say employers should support sick employees by allowing them to stay home without any fear of them losing their job or other repercussions. Keeping a safe distance between people. The distance should be at least a meter and people should continue to refrain from hugs and handshakes. Disinfecting household items and letting fresh air into your home. Airing out your house once in the morning and again at night is recommended. People are still encouraged to avoid gatherings in enclosed spaces. Disinfecting objects with diluted bleach every week is also encouraged. Practicing good personal hygiene and covering coughs. You're urged to wash your hands thoroughly every 2 hours, and it's recommended you refrain from touching your face. Also, to cover coughs, use your sleeves instead of your hands. Staying in touch with others. While we can't communicate face-to-face as much, the government asks people to stay connected by video call, phone, text, or email. Also, the guidelines say COVID-19 patients or people in self-quarantine should not be shunned or discriminated against. The rules, which are being finalized as the government gathers more opinions online, should be out later this month to level down from the current measures while still maintaining sensible measures to protect people from COVID-19. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Shifting focus, North Korea has decided to allocate almost half of its total annual budget to building the economy. According to its state-run Korean Central News Agency, the regime, during its Supreme People's Assembly on Sunday, allocated 47.8% of the budget to economic development. It also increased its investment in health services by 7.4%. But there was no mention of whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was present at the meeting, as Kim is not a member of the parliament. Sunday's session also resulted in a cabinet reshuffle. Foreign Minister Lee Sun-kwon was appointed as a member of the State Affairs Commission, which is under direct control of the leader Kim Jong-un. South Koreans under self-quarantine will be allowed to vote in Wednesday's general election as long as they're not showing symptoms of COVID-19. According to the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters on Sunday, people ordered to go into self-isolation from April 1st to 14th and without symptoms on Election Day can vote after 6 p.m. Korea time. That's after non-quarantined people have finished voting. Voters under self-quarantine will be allowed to leave their homes or facilities after 5:20 p.m. and arrive at the polling stations before 6 and return to their homes or facilities back by 7 p.m. And they will be banned from using public transportations and will have to travel on foot or by car to polling stations wearing face masks. And they will either be monitored by the government's mobile app for self-isolators or be accompanied by health officials. People arriving at polling stations across South Korea for this year's general election might be surprised, as they'll be presented with the longest ballot paper in South Korea's election history. On top of that, for the first time ever, 18-year-old South Koreans will be able to make their voices heard in the democratic process. For more on this, our Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
For this year's election, you might want to know when and how to vote and how the voting works. We break the election down into its key numbers. 626. For those who have a right to vote, the ballots will be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Be sure to vote in time if you are planning to cast a ballot, and don't forget to bring your identification cards with you, such as registration cards or passports. As the poll closes at 6, exit polls will be released. 300. That's the total number of seats up for grabs at the National Assembly. 253 seats are allocated for constituencies and 47 are determined by proportional representation. This year, 30 of the 47 proportional representation seats will be redistributed among the parties based on the new system. 2. At the polling station, you will get 2 ballot papers, one to vote for a candidate running for your constituency and the other to vote for the party you support for the proportional representation seats. 48.1. This year's proportional representation ballot papers are the longest ever used in Korea. They are 48.1 centimeters long, as there are 35 parties competing for proportional representation seats. It's the largest ever number. During the last election in 2016, there were 21 parties battling over the proportional representation seats, and the second ballot paper was over 33 centimeters long. In fact, electronic counters cannot read ballot papers longer than 34.9 centimeters, so for the first time in 18 years, the votes will be counted by hand. 18. From this year, 18-year-olds, those who were born before April 16, 2002, are eligible to vote. This comes as South Korea has lowered the voting age from 19 to 18. That lower voting age means an extra roughly 548,000 people are eligible to vote. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Good morning. We'll be on a wild temperature roller coaster today. We're going to see gaps of over 15 degrees Celsius in many parts of the country. Cooler air will turn much milder as the day goes on today. So let's take a closer look at what we can expect this afternoon. Seoul and Chuncheon will both get up to 20 degrees Celsius, Daegu at 18 degrees, and we'll also see plenty of spring sunshine with decent air quality. However, those of you on the East Coast and parts of Jeju are under strong wind advisories. Now, the gusts will be strong enough to shake trees, so please be careful. Meanwhile, Seoul is now under a dry weather advisory after 12 days of being under a dry weather warning. And it seems like we'll have to wait until Friday to see the dryness in the air ease with nationwide rain in the forecast. And this week is forecast to be a typical spring pattern with white gaps and lots of sunshine. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for views around the globe.
And that's all the news we have at this hour. As always, thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.